Well, it's politics everywhere, that's just par for the course. Well, it's politics.
Recorded for posterity.
Shema should have an aliyah. Good morning. So we're going to go a little bit more in the Gemara and talk about the whole idea of hefsek, of creating an interruption in the Kriya Shema. So a couple of opinions that said that if you make a hefsek in the Kriya Shema, you're not Yotze. But we're going to then look at the halacha and Siman Samech Hey, and see what the practical halacha of that is. Okay, and so let's continue in the Gemara. The Gemara had left us with a question yesterday, which was Bekore Misharin or Becholada Misharin. Do we use, when we talk about making a hefsek, who's Kriya Shema? Like the length of the hefsek, is it the time it takes me to take Kriya Shema? That if I pause then that I'm not Yotze? Is it the rabbi's Kriya Shema? Whose is it?
The person who has this issue is the one who went really fast.
Yeah, so Amar Rabbi Matanya Mistavra Bakore. So Rabbi Matanya says logic would dictate that the hefsek, the interruption, the pause, is the length of the person himself who's reciting Kriya Shema. Rabbi Avohu Shal Rabbi Yochanan, begin Da'ana Kore Shema Va'avar b'mevos hamitunafos umapsik. He says, so Rabbi Avohu asked Rabbi Yochanan the following question. I generally, he said, recite Kriya Shema while I'm traveling. He says, while I'm walking from one place to another in the street. Va'avar b'mevos hamitunafos umapsik. And what happens is that there's this one stretch of road where I have to pass by a garbage heap, dirty area, where I'm not permitted to recite Kriya Shema, because as we'll learn later on, I think it's in the third parak, when you're not allowed to recite Kriya Shema in a place which is smelly or dirty, that has waste material and so forth. So the question is, Nafik ana yedei chovasi, do I fulfill my obligation because of that time lag that I have to pause, or do I have to repeat the whole Kriya Shema because I've made this interruption? Like, let's say I only finished the first paragraph of the second paragraph, and I get to this dirty place and I have to pause, and then I resume. Do I have to repeat the whole thing or not?
Yeah, but we really earlier that you have to stand still while you're saying.
No, only the first pasuk. Okay, so Amar Lei Abahu Bini Imafsik At K'dei Likros Kula Lo Yatzasa Yedei Chovascha. He said that if your interruption is the amount of time that it takes to finish the entire Kriya Shema, so then you have not fulfilled your obligation, and you have to go back to the beginning and read it. Okay, so if you look at footnote number 24, Ladas HaBavli, the Talmud Bavli has a different opinion, and it says that Rabbi Yochanan Atzmo Savar Shala Olam Chozer L'Makom Shapasak Afilim Shazman Meruba, that Rabbi Yochanan is of the opinion that no matter how long you interrupt, you can always go back to where you left off. Utshuvasa l'Rebbe Avohu hi l'shitaso she'Rebbe Avohu bilvad hasover shahefsek ma'akev. And his response to Rebbe Avohu was according to your opinion, Rebbe Avohu, who says that interruptions can destroy what you've previously said, then you would have to go back to the beginning. But I personally, Rabbi Yochanan, am of the opinion that an interruption does not invalidate what you've already said, and you just have to go back to where you left off. Okay, let's go back to the top. Rabbi Elazar Salik Mivakra. So the Rabbi Shimon Bar Abba. The Rabbi Elazar went in the morning to visit Rabbi Shimon Bar Abba. Amar lei begin da ana tashish va'ana karishma umisnam name. So Reb Shimon Bar Abba asked him the following shaila because he was in a weakened state. He said, I'm a weak man, and a lot of times I'll start reciting Kriya Shema and I'll nod off, okay? And I have a hefsek, and then I'll wake up a couple minutes later and I want to resume. Nafik ana yidei chavasi, do I fulfill my obligation? So Amar lei, ain. So he said, yes, you do. Even if you had a very long interruption, because Rabbi Elazar disagrees with all the previous opinions, and he says that an interruption in Kriya Shema does not spoil or break up the previous verses that you said.
This is even a greater Kiddush in a way, because not only did you pause, your mind, when you're asleep, your mind is totally off of it as well.
Totally disengaged. Yeah, that's right. That's a good point. Rabbi Yirmiyah Ba'akume Rabbi Zeira, he says, Rabbi Yirmiyah asked Rabbi Zeira, Begain de Rabbi Lazar Yada de Rabbi Shimon Bar Abba Medaktek b'mitzvasa sagin horilei, I'll begin to hutashish horilei. So the question that I have is that, looking back at that story, that when Rabbi Lazar was visiting Rabbi Shimon Bar Abba, who was quite weak, and he gave him a dispensation, is that because he held that that's actually the halacha for even a healthy person? Or is it because, like as the commentary says, Kolomar Masha Haralo Rebbe Lazar Shiyatzi Yidei Chavaso Ein Ze Kula Shehekel Alav Machmas Chulshaso. It's not that he was being lenient with him because he was a frail and sickly man. Oh, begin to hutashish relay, or is it only because he was sickly that he gave him that dispensation? In other words, would Rebbe Lazar hold this way by a healthy person also? So we turn the page, and he says that Amar Lei beferish pligan. He says, no, it's an actual machlokis between Rebbe Yochanan and Rebbe Lazar as to whether an interruption is a problem for any person, not just a sickly person like Reb Shimon. He says, the Rebbe Lazar Omar Yatza, the Rebbe Yochanan Omar Lo Yatza. The Rebbe Lazar says that an interruption does not prevent you from being Yotze, and Rebbe Yochanan says you're not Yotze. And therefore, Reb Shimon ben Elazar's response to Reb Shimon bar Abba was even for a healthy person, okay? And Mapligan, B'Kriya Shema, Mipnei Shehi Asuya Prokim. Aval Bahalal Uvikriya Samagila Uf Rebbe Lazar Modeh. He says, but where's the only time that there's a machlokis, where Rebbe Lazar is lenient and says that as long as you stopped in between the paragraphs, even if you paused for a long period of time, you're still Yotze. He says that's only with Kriya Shema. And the reason why it's only with Kriya Shema is because when you look where these three paragraphs are in the Torah, they're on three distant parts. They're distant from each other. So even if you were reading the Torah and you were reading from Parshas Boaz Chanan, there'd be a lot of psukim until you got to Parshas Akev, the next parsha for V'hayayim Shamoa. And then you'd have to roll the Sefer Torah back to Parshas Shalach to read the Parsha of Tzitzis. They're disjointed paragraphs, and therefore having a pause in between them is not a big deal. However, if you pause in the middle of a required reading where all of the verses are contained together, then even Rebbe Lazar would agree that a hefsek, that a pause or an interruption will ruin it. So therefore, for Hallel And for Megillas Esther, Rebbe Lazar would agree that an interruption in those recitals will be a hefsek if you pause it long enough for you to be able to finish the whole thing. So with Hallel, it would certainly be an issue, okay? And let's say you're in the middle of reading the Megillah, you get called out for an emergency, and an hour later you come back, you want to resume. So there, even Rebbe Lazar would agree that you have to go back and start at the beginning. If it was a short pause, okay, we'll let you come back, but and resume where you were. But if the pause was long enough that you could read the entire Megillah, got to go back and start from
That's a pretty long pause because Megillah is so long, as opposed to Shema. It's not
Correct.
about
Correct.
4 minutes.
Correct.
We're talking about
Reciting the Megillah is about a half an hour. Yeah.
And the Seder, we make a big break. In the Seder, we break column.
Oh, that's an interesting point. But if you notice, it was instituted by Chazal, and there's even a bracha in between to demarcate that we're actually breaking it in half. So that's where it was instituted for that very purpose of having a break in between. Okay. So Hallel at the Seder would be an exception to the rule.
But the sleeping story is also perplexing because would the person remember where they left off? You fall asleep in the middle of something. Do you know exactly where to pick up from?
He's a smart guy.
I guess. I know I wouldn't, but I'm not.
Rabbi,
Reb Shimon Bar Abba. Okay, let's take a look. Let's take a look at the halacha. If someone would like to turn on the one day you'll figure it out, Izzy. There you go. All right. Thank you. Yeah. Right. So
Let's just wait.
it's a Musar oriented
Yes,
projector.
Only the best.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to share the screen. There we go. Okay. So the Shulchan Aruch writes as follows. Kara Serugin. If a person recites Kriya Shema with Serugin, which what does the word Serugin mean? Dahainu shehitchil likrot, you began reading, vihivsik, and then you interrupted. Bein b'shtika, bein b'dibur, whether it was through an interruption of silence or an interruption of speech, v'chazar v'gamra, and then you went ahead and you completed the Shema, afilu shaha kedei ligmor eskula, yatsa. Even if you paused for the amount of time that it takes to finish the entire Shema, you're still Yotzei. Afilu haya hahefsek machmas ones. Even if the interruption was due to a pure accident, meaning it's beyond your control. It's not like you voluntarily paused, but even if you paused for reasons that you couldn't control, like let's say there was an emergency, they called you out. And certainly that would your Yotzei, if your hefsek is not onus, it's not beyond your control. Let's say you're just waiting for the rabbi to finish the Shema. So there the Shulchan Aruch says you're totally Yotzei. And the Ramah says, V'yesh omrim dim haya anus, v'hifsek kedei ligmor eskula chozer l'rosh. The Ramah says that there are those who opine that if it was beyond your control, it's not like you paused voluntarily, but you paused for reasons that you couldn't help, and your pause was long enough to finish the entire thing. Chozer l'rosh. Then you have to start all over again. V'hachi nahug, and that's our minhag. U'misharin inyan ha'shehiyah lefi hakore v'lo lefi rov b'nei adam. And the duration of that pause is measured by the individual reciting the Shema and not based on the average time that it takes for a person to recite the Shema. So you see clearly in this halacha that first of all, we don't paskin like the Yerushalmi, or we paskin like Rebbe Lazar in the Yerushalmi. And now let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah to see what the issues are. Okay? Yeah.
So that's our minhag. Does that mean that it's our halacha, or is so the minhag is the status of halacha? So what does that mean? You know, if you don't follow that minhag, I mean.
Yeah, it's a good question. Why does the Rama say that that's the minhag? I think it's because the Rama was clearly cognizant of there being multiple opinions. And like we just saw, the opinion of Rebbe Lazar, when he was speaking to Rav Shimon, was that even if it's beyond your control, like you're a misnamnem, you're a weak person, and you're not able to stay awake, you'll still be yotzei. So he's basically saying, acknowledging that there are different opinions in the Gemara about this, our minhag is to be machmir, and that's therefore the psak. So let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. Bein b'dibor, it doesn't matter whether your interruption is silence or speech. Afilu imsach b'mezid, afta asa iser bazeh, even if you deliberately speak, which you're not allowed to do. You're not allowed to speak in the middle of Kriya Shema. You're not allowed to speak first of all, you're not allowed to speak during Psukei de Zimra. You're not allowed to speak between Baruch Hu and Shmona Esrei. Certainly not allowed to speak during Shmona Esrei. And you're not allowed to speak at any juncture between those three sections.
During the repetition.
And you're not allowed to speak during the repetition also. The only time you would be allowed to speak is after the repetition and Tachanun is over, then technically you're permitted to speak. So comes along the Mishnah Berurah and says, Afal pichein ein tzarich lachzor. Nonetheless, even though you've done something prohibited, you're not obligated to go back to the beginning. Rak lamakom shepasak. You just go back to the place where you left off. Afilu kishepasak be'emtza bracha. Even if you're in the middle of one of the blessings of the Shema, which is pretty surprising. You'd think, hey, you stopped in the middle of a bracha, go back to the beginning. No, you don't have to. V'hu hadin kishesach be'emtza halal u'megillah u'birkas hamazon o sha'ar bracha arucha. And the same thing is true even if you paused in the middle of Hallel or the recital of the Megillah or benching or any other lengthy bracha. You don't have to go back to the beginning. V'davka kishehu omrin ba'atzmo. But that's only if you're reciting it yourself. The im shomea me'acher shemotzio v'husach bintayim memela eno shomea ve'ech yatza bazeh. But if you're hearing someone else say it and you start schmoozing in the middle, then of course you can't be yotzei, because how are you going to hear it? So if a person is going to Kriyas HaMegillah, and his kid starts acting up, and he starts chastising his child during the reading of the Megillah, so he's missed stuff, he can't be yotzei that way. And there's a section in Shulchan Aruch for each case, for Hallel, for Megillah, for benching, and I refer you to each one in its proper place. V'ayin bebir halacha shekasavnu debekriya shma nachon sheyachzer haparshios od hapam kishesach b'mezid ki yesh tzarich lachzer l'rosh. As I clarify in the bir halacha, if you deliberately interrupted your Shema with speech, then it's proper to go back to the beginning. Even though that's above and beyond the letter of the law, but nonetheless, you should go back to the beginning, even if you interrupted for just a short period of time. Okay, let's go on. V'yesh omrim, and the Ramah had said that some say that if you paused for the amount that it would take to say the whole thing, but it was ba'ones, but it was accidentally, like you got stuck somewhere or whatever. So then you should go back to the beginning. So Tamam, the reason is the bishlama im lo haya anus shim haya rotsa haya yachol likros lo havi hashasika vafilo hadibur hefsek. He says in a situation where your pause is not compelled, it's something that you choose to do. I want to wait for the rabbi to finish. I'm in the middle of learning and I want to just pause for a second, or I want to meditate for a moment, whatever your reason is, then that's fine. And even if you pause for the duration of your recital, then you're still yotze. Aval ba'anus chashiva hashiyah hefsek. But if you're compelled to do so, because let's say you find yourself in a dirty alleyway, or nature calls and you have to run to the washroom, and you're there for an extended period of time because you've got a bout with who knows what, right? Or Montezuma's revenge. Kevin shalohaya az yachol likros, since you're unable to recite Kriya Shema at that time, that's considered to be a significant hefsek, and you have to go back to the beginning. Va'ayin b'magin Avram shemasik, the dafka im ha'ones umachmas sheha'ish eno roy. So he says, according to the Magen Avram, it's only when the person is incapable of reciting Shema at that moment. Kigon shehutzrach l'nekavav, o shahamakom eno roy, kigon shenimsa sham tsoa, o me raglain. So either because you have to use the washroom, nature calls, so you're not capable of reciting Shema, or you're in a place which precludes you from reciting Shema, like all of a sudden you realize after you started Shema that there's human waste, whether it's feces or urine, as we'll learn later on, you cannot recite the Shema. And by the way, this is very relevant for people with small babies. You guys, babies or grandchildren, right? Yeah. You're in the middle of davening at home, kids are over for Shabbos, and all of a sudden your kid has a bowel movement in his diaper, you're not able to recite Kriya Shema, and you'll have to stop. And all of a sudden it's Shabbos afternoon, or whatever it is, everyone's sleeping, and there's no one around. You can't give them to your wife, you can't give them to your daughter, change the diaper. All of a sudden it falls to you. And you got to put on the hazmat suit before you change his diaper. So it's going to take you a good few minutes before you can do this. You got to put on your gloves and your mask and all of these other things because you haven't changed diapers in centuries. So
another issue we used to come up a little bit at Baycrest, they have a shul in
yes,
and there's older people who are
yes,
dementia, they're wearing diapers, and they're
right.
in a minyan, they're part of a minyan there.
I had a situation years ago where a man who was suffering from dementia lost control of his bowels in the middle of davening, and it was really bad. But we had to actually, we were about to daven Musaf, and we all had to leave and go to the courtyard. It was in LA, so you could daven outside. It wasn't a problem. So we all had to go and vacate and go to the courtyard while his caregiver and the custodial staff cleaned everything up. And that's where we daven Musaf because of that. Yeah. So anyway, Oshi Yotzi, so V'hutzrach lishos ad sheyotzium, and the guy has to pause until the waste material is removed. Aval ones acher, but if there's another kind of oines, where you're not physically precluded from davening, such as kagon machmas listim v'chi gavna. Let's say all of a sudden an armed robber comes in and it's a holdup. So all of a sudden you've got to stop Kriya Shema. You're in the Talis and Tefillin, and a guy comes in and says, your money or your life. And so you got to...
You give him tzedakah and hope he leaves.
Yeah, right, right. And so, yeah, you give him some of those coupons. Yeah. He's a very aggressive Misholach, let's say, right? And so kagon machmas listim. So you have to pause. You don't have a choice, but you're not physically precluded from reciting the Shema, meaning the environment and you yourself are perfectly capable of reciting the Shema, but some external factor prevents you from doing it. Okay, he says that Havi Kamosha Shasak Baratzon, Delo Chashiv Hefsek L'Deyazu. That's not considered to be a hefsek. V'davka b'kriyishma uvir chosea v'chi gavna. But the only time that this is not a problem is when you're in the middle of Shema. Aval b'tfila, but with Shemona Esrei, if you pause for a long duration, choser l'rosh afilu ba'ones acher. As if it's an onus, doesn't matter what the onus is, whether it's nature calls or whether there's some other mishap, that emergency that requires you to interrupt. He says, then you have to go back to the beginning, uchamoshi yisbar lakaman, as we will explain later on. What? Yeah, in Israel, let's say the sirens go off, and you got to go to the miklat, or you got to go to the mamad. Okay, so that's an excellent point. Yeah, so the question is, would that require you to? It seems like if you're in the middle of Kriya Shema, you don't have to go back to the beginning. You can resume where you left off. But if you're in the middle of Shemona Esrei and you had to have a long pause, Kedei Ligmor Eskula to finish the whole Shemona Esrei, so then you would have to go back to the beginning.
Presumably you don't have to go back to your physical place. You can continue.
Correct. So let me just finish a couple of halachas. Kedei Ligmor, for the how long is the duration to finish the entire Shema? Hainu Merosh Bad, so from the beginning to end of the 3 paragraphs of Shema, even if you're already at the end towards the last paragraph, then the halacha is Choser L'Rosh. You have to go back to the beginning. Kol Ze Le'inyan Di'evet. Then this is all B'di'evet. That you don't have to go back to the beginning. Aval lechatchila lo yafsek lishos kedei ligmar kula. But it would be preferable not to pause at all if the pause is going to be long enough to finish the whole thing, even if it's not an onus. Va'afilu b'shtika ba'alma, even if it's just a silence. Va'afilu b'davar shehu midarabanan kegon birchas kriya shema v'halalu megillah chiyai gavna v'kol shkein debitfila yesh lizar ma'od bazeh. He says, and you should try your best to be machmir even with rabbinic prayers, such as the blessings of the Shema and Hallel and Megillah, and certainly with Shemona Esrei. Ki yesh shemachmirin b'tfila v'afilu b'di'evet. He says, because there are some people who are machmir even b'di'evet when it comes to the Amida and these other things. Umashmu midivrei Hamagen Avraham, Delechatchila nachon lizohar shelo yenagen hashatz harbe bebirchas kriya shema sheyeh behefsek echas kedei ligmor kula. He says, from the Magen Avram, it seems that the Chazan shouldn't have such long cantorial pieces in the middle of the blessings of the Shema, where it might be so long, these cantorial pieces, that he's going to keep everybody waiting for the amount of time that it takes to finish the whole Shema. Sha'az yitztarchu hakahal lahafsik harbi b'shtika al yado, because then it'll compel the entire congregation to pause. He says, you don't want that. Venerally, the kol shekain diyesh li zahar bebirkas kohanim shu midioraisa shelo ya'arichu az hakol ba'amiras hatachanunim be'esa birkas kohanim. He says, and the same thing would apply if, let's say, during Chazaras Hashatz, there's duchening on Yantiv. They shouldn't prolong the supplications for such a long time that it would take to finish the whole thing. Because then the Kohanim, who are in the middle of this blessing, have to pause for a long time. Kasav b'shem hagra sheyomru gam b'pam shlishis haribono shel olam lo yihi ratzon ha'aruch ki bahar be'pa'amim matzui sheina kohanim minagnim klal v'rakt omdim umamtinim ad sheyasaimu hakol mamiras madei lefam zman kedei ligmor kula. He says, because sometimes the kohanim are not singing, Apparently, it sounds like from the Mishnah Berurah that as long as the Kohanim are engaged in their singing, it's not considered a hefsek. But if the Kohanim are standing there silent, it could be a problem. And therefore, use the smaller, recite the smaller supplications, not the longer ones. Anyway, Velanos Kaddish o Kedusha Mutter Lishos, if you're interrupting to be able to answer to Kaddish or Kedusha, that's perfectly fine. Afilu K'dei Ligmar Eskula. Even if it takes you a long time, it takes you the time to finish the entire Shema. Umashma b'sefer Shulchan Shlomo dedavke ma'omed b'sof birchas emes v'yatziv dahaynu eitzel shira chadasha chidlakaman aval im adayin lo higia l'shira chadasha tov yoser sheyisha b'seirugin be'emsa bracha kama pamim pachos michadei ligmor kula. However, if it sounds like from a certain sefer called what's the name of the sefer? Shulchan Shlomo. It's mashma from the sefer Shulchan Shlomo, says the Mishnah Berurah, that let's say you're at a place where you have to pause for a very long time. It would be better to say emes v'yatziv v'nacham v'kayam v'yashar v'ne'eman v'yahu v'chaviv v'nechmad v'noim v'nora v'yadir v'fikana mikubal v'tov v'yafeh hadavar hazeh aleinu li'olam va'ed. Then pause another few seconds. Then say the next pasuk. Then pause another few seconds. In other words, if you find yourself having to wait for a very long period of time, it's better that you start the emes v'yatziv and then pause in between each sentence so that there's no one pause that is so long that it takes you that you can finish the entire Kriya Shema during that time. Okay, that's just the lichatchila though. So I don't think you have to be so machmir in the situation when you're waiting for the rabbi. But if it's going to be an inordinately long pause, that would be one way to mitigate the problems with the pause. But certainly b'di'evid, you're certainly yotzei. Okay, we'll hold it here for today. Let me wish you all a good Shabbos. Just as a reminder, because I'm going to be away starting Monday morning. So I'll either be away Monday through Wednesday or Monday through Thursday. My plane gets back, I think, 2:00 in the morning, Thursday morning. So that's at least what I just booked because we're still waiting for another baby. So we'll have to see how things